Imagine a hot August morning in 1892. In the quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts, silence suddenly turns deadly. Inside a well-to-do home, the lifeless body of a wealthy man lies in a pool of blood. In another room, a woman's skull is crushed, with blood soaking into the wooden floor. Standing in that same house is a 32-year-old woman, Lizzie Borden, staring at the bodies with cold, emotionless eyes. Did Lizzie murder her own father and stepmother with an axe? Or was there a shadowy killer roaming the streets of Fall River, hiding in plain sight? Today, we uncover one of America's most chilling and unsolved murder mysteries, the Lizzie Borden case. It was August 4th, 1892, around 9 a.m., when the small town of Fall River would be changed forever. Andrew Borden, a wealthy but notoriously frugal man, was preparing to leave for work. His wife Abby Borden was cleaning the guest room upstairs. The air was thick with summer heat, but inside the Borden home, something felt off. Lizzie Andrews' 32-year-old daughter moved around the house quietly. She later claimed she was in the barn looking for sinkers for a fishing trip, but what really happened during that hour would become one of America's most debated mysteries. Just after 11 a.m., a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. "Father's dead. Somebody's come in and killed him." Andrew Borden's body was found on the parlor sofa, his face unrecognizable, almost split in two. Blood had soaked through the couch and dripped onto the floor, leaving a dark pool beneath him. His skull had been struck at least 10 times with what was later identified as a hatchet or small axe. Upstairs, Abby Borden's body was discovered lying face down on the floor of the guest bedroom, her head brutally hacked with nearly 20 strikes. Blood was splattered on the walls, on the bed, and pooled around her hair, which was matted with congealed blood. Strangely, Lizzie seemed calm. She showed no tears, no visible panic, and calmly told the arriving police that she didn't know who could have done such a thing. She claimed she was outside, looking for fishing supplies in the barn during her father's murder. The police noted the unusual calmness in Lizzie's demeanor, the lack of visible shock, and the strangely neat appearance of her clothing. There was no blood on her dress, no signs of a struggle, and the murder weapon was nowhere to be found. Yet in this small town, rumors started to swirl. How could such a brutal crime take place in broad daylight without anyone hearing screams or witnessing a stranger enter the house? Why did Lizzie not hear her stepmother being murdered upstairs? Why was the front door left unlocked on the morning of the murder? Thus, the first chapter of the Lizzie Borden mystery unfolded in blood, silence, and suspicion, setting the stage for a trial that would captivate America for generations. News of the brutal murder spread rapidly across Fall River. Neighbors whispered over fences, papers were quickly filled with headlines of brutal axe murder, and the once quiet street was now swarming with curious townsfolk, reporters, and police officers. The Borden family had been wealthy, but Andrew's stinginess had made them unpopular. Andrew's frugality was extreme. Despite his wealth, the Borden house lacked indoor plumbing, and the family lived simply. Lizzie and her sister Emma resented their father's controlling nature, and their stepmother Abby, whom they suspected of scheming for the family money. Tensions in the household had been escalating for months. Lizzie had reportedly stopped calling Abby mother and referred to her as Mrs. Borden. Family disputes over property and inheritance were common, and the home was filled with silent tension. The morning of the murder, the maid, Bridget Sullivan, was in the house. She claimed she was washing windows when Abby was killed and was resting in her room when Andrew was murdered. Bridget described Lizzie as calm, even offering her a cold drink after the murders. The police quickly focused on Lizzie. They found her behavior suspicious. She seemed composed, changed her story about her whereabouts, and showed no visible grief. When asked where she was during the murders, Lizzie's stories varied. She said she was in the barn, then in the house, then outside again, creating confusion in her timeline. Neighbors reported that Lizzie had tried to burn a dress in the kitchen stove a few days after the murders, claiming it was stained with paint. The police suspected it might have been blood. Meanwhile, the murder weapon was never definitively found. Although a hatchet with a broken handle was discovered in the basement, the public opinion was divided. Many in the town could not believe that a respectable church-going woman like Lizzie could commit such a horrific act. Others believed that her cool demeanor was proof of her guilt. Fear gripped the town. Was there a murderer still lurking in Fall River, ready to strike again? Or was the killer already inside the Borden home, hiding behind the innocent face of Lizzie Borden? The investigation into the Borden murders began immediately, but it was chaotic from the start. Neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers trampled through the crime scene, making it difficult for the police to preserve evidence. The Borden home, filled with a heavy scent of blood and death, became the center of a circus-like frenzy. The autopsies were performed right inside the Borden home, on the dining room table. The skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden revealed the brutality of the murders. Deep gashes, crushed bones, and the clear imprint of a hatchet blade. The image of the cracked skulls haunted everyone who saw them. Attention turned quickly to Lizzie. She was questioned by the police and gave conflicting statements about where she was during the murders. She told one officer she was in the barn looking for fishing sinkers. Later, she said she was inside the house reading magazines. Her story changed again when she said she had heard a groan or scraping noise but did not think it was important. To make matters more suspicious, Lizzie was seen burning a blue dress in the kitchen stove a few days after the murders. When asked why, she calmly said it was stained with paint and no longer needed. But in the eyes of the police and the public, this act looked like a desperate attempt to destroy evidence. The murder weapon was still missing. During a search of the Borden home, police found a small hatchet in the basement with a broken handle. It appeared to have been freshly cleaned, but traces of what might have been blood or rust were found on it. Police believed it could be the murder weapon, hidden in plain sight. Rumors swirled around Fall River. Some whispered Lizzie had committed the murders because she was angry about her father's refusal to change his will. Others believed she hated her stepmother, Abby, and that greed drove her to murder. There were even rumors of family secrets and abuse, but nothing was proven. Despite the suspicion surrounding her, Lizzie never showed visible fear. She attended her parents' funeral dressed in black, standing calmly beside the graves as whispers followed her. Her stoic demeanor became both her shield and the reason people feared her. As the investigation deepened, the police were faced with a troubling reality. There was no clear evidence linking Lizzie to the murders. There were no eyewitnesses, no bloody clothes, and no murder weapon definitively tied to her. But the cloud of suspicion was heavy, and the town of Fall River was divided. Was Lizzie Borden a cold-blooded killer who planned the perfect crime? Or was she an innocent woman caught in a nightmare of suspicion and town gossip? As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on the authorities grew. The public demanded justice. The newspapers wanted a story, and Lizzie Borden found herself at the center of it all, waiting for the day when the accusations would turn into formal charges. On August 11th, 1892, exactly 1 week after the brutal murders, Lizzie Borden was arrested. The town of Fall River erupted in shock and curiosity. People lined the streets, watching as Lizzie, dressed in black, was taken into custody. She was charged with the murders of her father, Andrew, and her stepmother, Abby. The newspapers had a field day, printing bold headlines like Lizzie Borden, arrested for axe murders. Illustrations of Lizzie's pale.com face appeared in papers across the country, turning her into a national figure overnight. During the inquest leading up to her arrest, Lizzie had shown signs of nervousness. She fainted in court and was given morphine by her doctor to calm her nerves. Many would later argue that the morphine clouded her mind, leading to the inconsistencies in her testimony. Her behavior remained unusual. Lizzie did not show outward grief, and her calmness was often interpreted as coldness. She did not cry in court, and her eyes remained fixed on the floor or on the judges as she listened to the evidence being presented against her. The town was torn. Some believed Lizzie was innocent, a victim of a tragic circumstance. They argued that a woman of her social standing, active in the church and involved in charity work, could never commit such a heinous crime. Others were convinced that Lizzie's calm demeanor was proof of her guilt, that she was a cold-blooded murderer hiding behind her quiet exterior. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Lizzie was the only person in the house at the time of both murders, aside from the maid, Bridget, who claimed she was resting in her room. The burnt dress, the broken-handled hatchet, and Lizzie's inconsistent statements all added to the suspicion. Still, the prosecution faced a difficult task. They had no direct evidence, no murder weapon definitively tied to Lizzie, and no eye. The case would depend heavily on Lizzie's behavior, her motive, and the circumstantial evidence that surrounded her. As Lizzie sat in her cell awaiting trial, the world outside buzzed with speculation. The Borden home, now empty and cold, stood as a dark monument to the brutal murders that had shattered the peace of Fall River. Would Lizzie Borden be found guilty of the murders that everyone believed she committed? Or would she walk free, forever haunted by the shadows of suspicion? The stage was set for one of the most sensational trials in American history, a trial that would reveal family secrets, societal expectations, and the dark whispers that follow the scent of blood. June 5, 1893, the small town of New Bedford, Massachusetts, was alive with reporters, photographers, and curious townsfolk as the trial of Lizzie Borden began. It was called the trial of the century, and people traveled from across the country to catch a glimpse of the young woman accused of murdering her father and stepmother with a hatchet. Lizzie walked into the courtroom dressed in black, her expression cold and composed. She sat quietly beside her defense team, folding her gloved hands on her lap, as crowds strained to see the woman behind the headlines. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Hosea Knowlton, laid out their case with methodical precision. They described how Lizzie was the only person in the house when both murders took place, aside from the maid Bridget, who claimed she heard nothing. They painted a picture of Lizzie's strained relationship with her stepmother and suggested a motive. Lizzie wanted her father Esmani and resented Abby's presence in their lives. They also pointed to Lizzie's suspicious behavior, her conflicting statements about where she was during the murders, her attempt to burn a stained dress days after the murders, the discovery of a hatchet with a broken handle in the basement. But the defense, led by former Massachusetts Governor George D. Robinson, came prepared to dismantle every point. They argued that Lizzie's gender and social standing made it impossible for her to commit such a violent crime. They claimed she loved her father and could never brutally murder him. They emphasized the lack of physical evidence tying Lizzie directly to the crime, noting that no bloodstains were found on her person and that the hatchet could not be conclusively linked to the murders. The courtroom was packed daily. Reporters sketched Lizzie's face as she listened to testimony with an unreadable expression, only occasionally whispering to her lawyers. The public outside was divided. Some believed Lizzie was innocent, a victim of circumstance, while others believed she was a cold-blooded killer hiding behind her quiet demeanor. The judge allowed the jury to tour the Borden house to see where the murders occurred, letting them witness the close quarters of the small home and understand how the murders could have been committed, without Bridget or neighbors hearing. But the defense argued that the lack of blood evidence was a sign of Lizzie's innocence, not her guilt. The trial dragged on for weeks, with each day bringing new headlines, rumors, and theories. Women wore black ribbons in support of Lizzie, while others whispered that they could see the devil in her eyes. Behind the polished words and legal arguments, the real questions lingered like a dark cloud over the trial. Could Lizzie Borden, a Sunday school teacher and respectable young woman, have picked up a hatchet and hacked her parents to death? Or was she the victim of a society eager to blame a woman for a crime too horrible to comprehend? As the final days of the trial approached, the world waited for the verdict that would decide Lizzie Borden's fate. The trial reached a tense peak as witnesses took the stand, their testimonies weaving a dark, tangled web of suspicion and doubt. Bridget Sullivan, the Borden family's maid, was one of the key witnesses. She described the events of the morning with a trembling voice, explaining how she was washing windows outside while Abby Borden was murdered upstairs. She said she heard nothing unusual, no screams, and saw no strangers enter the house. Bridget's testimony raised more questions than answers. How could two brutal murders occur in broad daylight without a single scream heard in a small wooden house? The prosecution called Dr. Dolan, the medical examiner, who described the horrific injuries on the victims in gruesome detail. He held up the skulls of Andrew and Abby in the courtroom, showing the deep gashes and crushed bone. The sight was so shocking that Lizzie fainted in her seat, causing chaos in the courtroom. Another witness, Alice Russell, a close friend of Lizzie's, testified that Lizzie had burned a dress in the kitchen stove just days after the murders. Lizzie told Alice it was stained with paint, but many believed it was stained with blood. This moment was one of the prosecution's strongest pieces of evidence, suggesting Lizzie was hiding something. Neighbors testified about Lizzie's behavior in the days following the murders. Some said she was unusually calm, almost cold, while others described her as acting strangely, speaking of the murders without emotion. Some testified that Lizzie had tried to buy prussic acid, a deadly poison, shortly before the murders. Although this claim was never conclusively proven, the defense worked tirelessly to dismantle the prosecution's claims. They brought in their own medical experts to argue that the hatchet found in the basement could not be the murder weapon. They emphasized Lizzie's character, her involvement in the church, and her reputation as a kind, gentle woman. They argued that the police had focused on Lizzie because she was a convenient suspect, and that they had failed to investigate other possibilities. They reminded the jury that there was no direct evidence tying Lizzie to the crime, no eyewitnesses, and no murder weapon definitively linked to her. As each witness spoke, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The public outside debated endlessly. Was Lizzie Borden a monster in disguise? Or was she being unfairly targeted because of gossip and suspicion? The testimonies were over, but the mystery of what truly happened in the Borden house that August morning remained unsolved, leaving the jury with a heavy decision that would forever shape the legend of Lizzie Borden. Among the most chilling pieces of evidence in the Lizzie Borden case was the hatchet found in the basement of the Borden house. It was small, with a broken handle, and appeared to have been freshly cleaned. Investigators believed it could be the murder weapon used to hack Andrew and Abby Borden to death. The police found the hatchet among other tools, but this one was different. It had a gray ash-like substance on it, later believed to be a mixture of dust and ash, possibly from the fireplace. Some officers thought it was placed there deliberately to disguise any traces of blood. During the trial, the prosecution displayed the hatchet to the jury, claiming it matched the wounds found on both victims. They argued that the shape and size of the blade corresponded with the gashes on the skulls, which had been brutally split with clean, powerful strikes. The defense, however, countered with their own experts. They argued that the hatchet had no visible traces of blood, hair, or flesh, and therefore, it could not conclusively be linked to the murders. They pointed out that the Borden house was an old place, and the hatchet was just one of many tools lying around in the basement. Additionally, the defense highlighted the sloppy work of the police. The crime scene had been contaminated by curious neighbors and reporters who wandered through the house before evidence could be properly collected. With so many people entering and exiting, the defense argued that the chain of custody for the hatchet was weak. The lack of blood evidence on Lizzie herself became a focal point. How could Lizzie have killed two people so violently without getting a single drop of blood on her clothes or skin? The prosecution suggested that Lizzie may have committed the murders naked or in an old dress she later burned. But this was just a theory without solid proof. The hatchet became a symbol of the case. A small, cold object carrying the weight of a brutal crime, yet wrapped in uncertainty. The prosecution wanted the jury to see it as the murder weapon, the silent witness to a horrific act of violence. The defense wanted the jury to see it as just another household tool, irrelevant and unrelated to Lizzie's guilt. As the trial progressed, the hatchet sat in the courtroom, a grim reminder of the brutality of the murders. Jurors glanced at it, the public speculated about it, and Lizzie avoided looking at it altogether. But despite the prosecution's insistence, the truth remained out of reach. Was this the weapon that ended two lives and shattered the peace of Fall River? Or was it just a piece of iron caught in the storm of suspicion? As the Lizzie Borden trial continued, her defense team carefully built a plan to save her from a death sentence. Leading the defense was former Massachusetts Governor George D. Robinson, a respected and experienced lawyer. He knew that to win, he had to break the prosecution's arguments piece by piece and create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. The first and strongest point of the defense was the lack of direct evidence. There were no eyewitnesses who saw Lizzie commit the murders. The police found no bloodstains on her clothes or body, despite the brutal and bloody nature of the killings. The supposed murder weapon, the hatchet with a broken handle, had no clear blood or hair on it to connect it directly to Lizzie. The defense also attacked the police investigation. They argued that the crime scene was poorly handled, with neighbors and reporters allowed to walk through the house before evidence was collected. The defense claimed that the police decided Lizzie was guilty too quickly and stopped looking for other suspects. Another important part of the defense was Lizzie's behavior and character. They described her as a quiet, church-going woman who spent her time in charity work and taking care of her family. Friends and church members testified that Lizzie had a gentle nature and loved her father dearly, making it hard to believe she could commit such a violent crime. Lizzie's lawyer argued that if Lizzie had planned the murder, she would have chosen poison or another method rather than a brutal hatchet attack in broad daylight. They said it was unthinkable for a woman like Lizzie, living in Victorian society, to commit such a crime with her own hands. The defense also explained the burning of the dress. Lizzie said the dress had been stained with paint, and there was no proof the stain was blood. The defense insisted that burning an old dress was not a crime and was not evidence of murder. They also reminded the jury of Lizzie's emotional collapse in the courtroom, her fainting at the sight of her parents' skulls, and her clear distress throughout the proceedings. They argued that this was not the behavior of a cold-blooded killer, but of an innocent woman wrongly accused. Each day in court, Lizzie sat quietly, dressed in black, sometimes crying softly as witnesses spoke. The defense wanted the jury to see her as a victim of suspicion, not a murderer, and to remember that the burden of proof was on the prosecution. The final message from the defense was clear. Greater than if there's any doubt in your minds, you must find her not guilty. As the trial neared its end, the jury faced a difficult choice. Would they see Lizzie as a monster in disguise, or as a victim of a community that wanted someone to blame for a horrifying crime? As the Lizzie Borden trial dragged on, the media frenzy exploded. Newspapers across America printed sensational headlines, calling it the Fall River Axe murder and the trial of the century. Sketch artists drew chilling images of Lizzie's pale, emotionless face beside bloody hatchet, while rumors and theories sold thousands of copies daily. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered each morning to watch Lizzie walk in, dressed in black, her hat pulled low over her eyes. Some people whispered prayers for her innocence, while others spat on the ground, calling her the devil's daughter. Vendors sold small axes carved from wood as grim souvenirs, turning tragedy into profit. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled the back rows, scribbling notes as the drama unfolded. Every detail of Lizzie's life was dissected: what she ate, how she looked at the jury, whether she cried during testimony. When Lizzie fainted during the presentation of her parents' skulls, it was on the front page the next morning, described as the collapse of a murderess by some, and the breakdown of an innocent woman by others. The case became a battleground for society's perceptions of women and violence. Many could not believe that a well-dressed church-going woman could commit such a horrific crime. In the Victorian era, women were seen as too delicate, too morally pure, to wield an axe with such rage. Supporters wore white ribbons to court, showing their belief in Lizzie's innocence. But others saw the cracks in this image. They pointed to Lizzie's cold demeanor, her inconsistent stories, and her calmness after the murders. To them, Lizzie represented the terrifying idea that evil could hide behind the face of a seemingly gentle woman. Journalists fueled the divide. Papers like the Boston Globe and the New York World published articles questioning whether Lizzie's gender was shielding her from a harsher investigation. Editorials debated if a man with the same circumstantial evidence would have already been convicted. The trial also revealed a morbid public fascination with murder. People wanted to see the crime scene photographs, to read about the details of the blood-soaked carpet, and to analyze the positioning of the body. They wanted to know how many blows it took to kill Abby Borden, how Andrew's face was nearly split in two, and how the killer escaped without leaving a trail. Every day, the courthouse steps became a stage where opinions clashed. The case was no longer just about finding the truth. It had become a reflection of society's fears, curiosities, and the dark thrill people found in real-life horror. In the midst of this chaos, Lizzie sat quietly, watching, as the world decided whether she was a monster or a victim. The whispers outside grew louder, and the verdict that was soon to come would not only decide Lizzie's fate, but would shape the legacy of one of America's most chilling murder cases forever. June 20th, 1893. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation as the jury filed back into their seats. After weeks of testimony, rumors, and relentless public scrutiny, it was time to decide the fate of Lizzie Borden. Lizzie sat quietly, dressed in black, her gloved hands folded in her lap. Her sister Emma sat nearby, her eyes red from crying, whispering silent prayers. Outside, crowds pressed against the courthouse doors, desperate to know if the woman accused of brutally murdering her father and stepmother would walk free or hang. The jury had deliberated for just over an hour before returning with their verdict. The speed shocked everyone. Some expected days of debate. Others thought Lizzie's fate was sealed the moment the trial began. As the foreman stood, the room held its breath. Not guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Lizzie's face went pale, and for a brief moment, her composure broke. She let out a soft, choked sob and collapsed into her chair, tears finally streaming down her face. Emma rushed to her, holding her tightly as the sisters wept together. Outside, reactions were mixed. Some cheered, proclaiming justice had been served, while others muttered in anger, convinced a murderer had just been set free. Reporters ran to telegraph offices to send the news across the country. Lizzie Borden, the woman at the center of America's most sensational murder trial, had been acquitted. The judge dismissed the case, and Lizzie was free to leave. But the shadow of suspicion would never leave her. As she stepped outside into the sunlight, reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked, and onlookers stared in stunned silence. Lizzie's eyes were swollen from crying, but her posture remained upright as she walked to the carriage that would take her away. Despite the verdict, whispers continued. Many believed Lizzie's wealth and social status had saved her, arguing that if she had been a poor woman, the outcome would have been different. Others believed the lack of direct evidence and the sloppy investigation had made conviction impossible. Lizzie later told a reporter, "I am the happiest woman in the world," but happiness was a fragile thing for her. Though she was legally free, the court of public opinion was far harsher. In Fall River, people crossed the street to avoid her. Children sang cruel rhymes. Lizzie Borden took an axe, and neighbors whispered behind curtains when she passed. No matter how hard she tried, Lizzie could not escape the eyes that followed her, the suspicion that clung to her like a shadow. The verdict had set Lizzie Borden free, but it had not cleared her name. The question remained, whispered in dark corners and printed in bold headlines. Did Lizzie Borden get away with murder? Lizzie Borden was free, but she would never truly be free again. After her acquittal, Lizzie and her sister Emma returned to Fall River, but the town they came home to felt colder, filled with whispers and eyes that followed them everywhere. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Children chanted outside their home, singing, "Greater than Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks." When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The rhyme would follow Lizzie for the rest of her life. Lizzie named it Maple. The house had all the comforts denied to her by her frugal father, including indoor plumbing and elegant furnishings. She filled it with fine clothes, art, and the things she had once only dreamed of. Despite the whispers, Lizzie and Emma used their inheritance to buy a large, modern house on French Street, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Fall River. She attended the theater, hosted gatherings, and traveled, attempting to live as a respectable woman of society. She never publicly explained why, but rumors spread that the sisters had a fierce argument, possibly over Lizzie's association with questionable friends, or a scandal in town. But changing her name could not change her shadowed legacy. Locals avoided walking past it at night, saying they felt a chill when they neared it, and the memory of the murders lingered in the town like a ghost that would not leave. Many people in Fall River refused to do business with her. Shops closed their doors when she entered, and she often faced insults whispered behind her back. She found some comfort in her pets, especially her dogs, who were said to be her constant companions in her later years. They never spoke again, but wherever she went, people stared. She was no longer Ms. Lizzie Borden, the quiet Sunday school teacher, but Lizzie Borden, the axe murderess. Lizzie tried to build a new life. She never publicly spoke about the murders after the trial, maintaining her innocence in silence, even as the world continued to debate her guilt. The isolation grew heavy, and in 1905, over a decade after the trial, Emma suddenly moved out of Maplecroft. Lizzie's social circle shrank, until only a few loyal friends remained. Despite being acquitted, Lizzie lived under a life sentence of suspicion. She also began to call herself Lizbeth instead of Lizzie, perhaps trying to leave behind the name that had become infamous across America. The Borden home on 2nd Street, where the murders took place, remained standing, a grim monument to the day Fall River lost its innocence. Lizzie Borden may have escaped prison, but she could never escape the prison of public suspicion, nor the dark cloud that would follow her, until her final days. Even after Lizzie Borden was acquitted, the world kept asking the same question. If Lizzie didn't kill her father and stepmother, then who did? Over the years, many theories have emerged, each adding layers to the mystery. One theory suggests that Bridget Sullivan, the maid, may have been the killer. Bridget was in the house during both murders, yet claims she heard nothing. Some say she may have snapped under the stress of working in the Borden home, where tensions ran high and the atmosphere was cold and strict. Bridget was also reportedly sick on the day of the murders, possibly due to food poisoning from spoiled milk, and this stress, combined with anger toward the Bordens, may have pushed her over the edge. However, no clear motive or evidence ever tied Bridget to the murders. Supporters of this theory argue that she was motivated by resentment toward her stepmother and anger at her father's financial control over her life. They believe Lizzie planned the murders carefully, killed Abby first, while Andrew was away, and then killed her father when he returned home. And she left Fall River soon after the trial, taking any secrets she had with her to her grave. Supporters of this theory point out that the Bordens were not well liked in town due to Andrew Borden's strict business practices, and he had many enemies. The case has become a ghost story wrapped in true crime, with Lizzie Borden forever at its heart, whether guilty or innocent. However, there were no signs of forced entry, and it seemed unlikely that a killer could enter, murder two people in broad daylight, and leave without being seen or heard. Another theory claims an unknown intruder entered the Borden home and committed the murders. Some theorists believe that Andrew Borden may have fathered an illegitimate child who returned seeking revenge or money, leading to the murders when demands were refused. Some claim that Emma and Lizzie may have planned the murders together to secure their inheritance. However, Emma was away from Fall River at the time, staying with a friend, making it unlikely that she was directly involved unless she and Lizzie had pre-planned everything in secret. This theory, however, remains purely speculative, with no evidence to support it. There is also speculation about illegitimate family connections. Another theory is that Emma Borden, Lizzie's older sister, may have had a role in the murders. The most popular theory remains that Lizzie herself committed the murders. They speculate that Lizzie may have committed the murders naked or in an old dress, which she later burned to eliminate evidence, explaining the lack of bloodstains. Despite all these theories, no one truly knows who killed Andrew and Abby Borden. The Hatchet murders remain one of America's most chilling unsolved crimes, and the Borden home on 2nd Street stands as a dark reminder of the brutal morning in 1892, when a family was shattered forever. Each theory leaves a trail of possibilities, but none have brought the truth to light. In the years following the trial, Lizzie Borden lived in the shadow of her past. Despite her acquittal, the town of Fall River never forgave her. People turned away when she walked down the street, shopkeepers refused to serve her, and the whispers of murderers followed her wherever she went. Lizzie, who began calling herself Lizbeth, spent most of her days in her grand house Maplecroft on French Street. It was a beautiful home with elegant furniture, art, and even a telephone, rare for that time. Some say it was because Lizzie was involved in a scandal with an actress, which Emma disapproved of. Others believe Emma could no longer live under the weight of the suspicions tied to their family name. She surrounded herself with the luxuries her father once denied her, but despite the comfort, Maplecroft felt like a prison. She remained interested in the arts and charity work, but her social circle grew smaller each year. She lived with a few loyal servants and her beloved dogs, who became her constant companions. Was she a victim of a society that could not believe a woman could commit murder? Or was she a cold-blooded killer who escaped justice? The outside world was harsh, but inside her home, Lizzie found a small sense of peace, even if it was clouded by loneliness. Her relationship with her sister Emma had also shattered. In 1905, Emma left Maplecroft suddenly, never explaining why, and the sisters never spoke again. It was as if the sisters, tied together by tragedy, could not remain apart, even in death. Lizzie rarely left her home, except to attend the theater or take quiet carriage rides through town, often in disguise to avoid the stares. Her grave is marked with a simple stone, and even today, people visit, leaving pennies, flowers, and sometimes small axes as dark tributes. She developed gallbladder issues, and in 1927, she underwent surgery, hoping for recovery. The complications followed, and on June 1st, 1927, Lizzie Borden died at the age of 66. As Lizzie aged, her health began to fail. Just days later, her estranged sister Emma died too, at age 76, in New Hampshire. Lizzie was buried in Oak Grove Cemetery, near the graves of her father and stepmother, the very people she was accused of killing. In death, Lizzie found the peace that eluded her in life. Yet, the questions surrounding her never faded. Even in her final days, Lizzie never confessed, never spoke publicly about the murders, and never tried to clear her name. She took her secrets to the grave, leaving the world with a mystery that has never been solved, a ghost story that continues to haunt America over a century later. Even today, more than 130 years after the murders, the name Lizzie Borden continues to haunt America. Her story has become a dark legend, inspiring books, documentaries, movies, and even songs. Children still skip rope to the rhyme, "Greater than Lizzie Borden took an axe, and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father." The rhyme is not accurate to be received around 19 blows. And Andrew around 10, but it has kept the story alive in the public imagination, turning Lizzie into a ghostly figure whispered about in the dark. The Borden house in Fall River, where the murders took place, still stands on 2nd Street. It has been turned into a bed and breakfast where visitors can sleep in the very rooms where Andrew and Abby were murdered. Guests report hearing footsteps in empty hallways, cold drafts in the middle of the night, and even seeing the ghostly figure of a woman in Victorian clothing moving through the house. People travel from around the world to stay there, hoping to feel the chill of history or perhaps encounter the spirits of the Bordens who never found justice. Lizzie's home, Maplecroft, also still stands, a beautiful Victorian house with a dark connection to the past. Some believe her spirit remains there, forever trapped in the home where she tried to live a normal life, but could never escape her past. Historians and true crime enthusiasts continue to debate whether Lizzie was truly guilty or innocent. Was she a clever murderer who got away with the perfect crime, using her gender and social status to shield her from conviction? Or was she an innocent woman, forever cursed by suspicion because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time? The Lizzie Borden case changed how America viewed crime, gender, and justice. It showed the power of public opinion, the influence of the media, and how a crime can become a legend when the truth remains hidden. Even in modern culture, Lizzie's story continues to inspire horror films, television series, and podcasts, each exploring new theories and interpretations. Some portray her as a victim of abuse, others as a cold-blooded killer with a hidden rage. Yet despite all the stories, theories, and investigations, no one has ever discovered what truly happened on that August morning in 1892. The truth was buried with Lizzie, leaving behind a legacy of whispers and shadows that continue to fascinate and terrify those who hear her name. Lizzie Borden's story is more than a murder case. It is a reminder of how mystery can outlive facts, how legends can overshadow truth, and how one morning of bloodshed can echo for generations. And perhaps, as long as the rhyme is sung, and as long as people visit the old Borden house, Lizzie Borden will never truly rest.